Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. Because we have a newer audience with us today, and I'm always excited, and this is a real live, not a recorded, it's live and in the moment. And we have a great guest for you today. But to give a little bit of context to that, many of the people in the community, meaning the family office and investing world, would know me as being the founder and longtime CEO at Family Office Association. I had an exit over a year ago. So I had an opportunity to take some time off to reflect on what I wanted to do. And all I know and love is the family office community. And I do love interviews, mainly if I could be selfish for a second, because I learned so much from incredible guests that I have, including our guest today. And this has been an unusually busy week with Leon Cooperman, with Jolyne today, I actually have a Stanford professor on creativity tomorrow. I have Ram Alalia, a common guest of mine, maybe the most brilliant person on investing on Thursday. And then perhaps the return of my most common high-profile guest, who's incredibly intelligent. Many of you are familiar with Adam Robinson, who's been on Tim Ferriss multiple times. And that's going to be a 2.5-hour plus interview. We have a lot to discuss. So this is a busy week. So I do love my Family Office TV. And I'm also the founder of SFO Continuity. That's my private membership club, limited for now to only 30 founding families, and my educational platforms and Family Office Masterclass. Today, you're in for a special treat. We have, look at this title, 1,000 family offices over 4 years. So imagine someone who's incredibly intelligent, highly successful, and she had the opportunity to meet with that many incredible investors, family offices, principals, rising generation family members, and family office executives. The insight that she's going to share well over an hour. We have a lot to discuss, is going to be incredible. But this is a program today that kind of almost really has two titles. It's not just 1,000 families over 4 years. It's also why women will control finance. Dynamics, demographics, a whole bunch of things are changing. And the world is very different now than it was even, right pre-COVID, 10 years ago. For old timers like me that could go back decades, it's an interesting time. And I have a lot of questions. We want you to engage and interact with asking questions as well. There will probably be some things that me and Jolyne, our special guests, may have a disagreement here or there, but that's good. That's what's missing in this country now. Have a strong opinion, but have it weakly held. As new information comes in, or as we talk to people that are intelligent, we may change our opinion, and that's a good thing. Actually, stupid people don't change their opinion. They get anchored. They get confirmation bias. I want to seek out varying opinions, so it helps me foster and make better decisions in what I do. So our special guest today is Jolyne Caruso, most recently vice chair of UBS. Jolyne, it's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo. Thrilled to be here.
So, I'm looking at your bio now. It'd probably take 2 minutes to do it justice, but to give the audience a little bit of context, Jolyne has remained steadfast in her support of both philanthropic and her own family's investments, and of women and female founders, being one of the first investors in Golden Seeds, an incredible company. I think that probably Jolyne goes back to 2007, 2008. Chair Emeritus of Bernard College Board of Trustees, board member of Columbia's Entrepreneurship, chair of Aligned Impact, and female-founded impact-focused RIA. And it's way more than that. So again, kudos to you and your accomplishments. Welcome to the show. If you don't mind, we're going to get right into it. So
I'm ready for you.
The first part of the title why don't we get right to it as the biggest takeaway? You've met 1,000 family offices over 4 years, and you may have here's the biggest, here's the second, here's the third. I don't want to box you into only the biggest. So why don't I wind you up on that one and let us know what insights you learned?
Yeah, so I want to put this in a little bit of context so that everyone can understand how this woman did 1,000 meetings. I was in an amazing seat at UBS as a vice chair. And when I was hired by Tom Naratil, who ran Global Wealth, he suddenly sent me an email, his assistant one day, saying, you need to track every meeting and call that you take with families. And they gave me this elaborate spreadsheet of, you know, the date, the person, the conversation, the potential. And when I first got it, I was sort of taken aback and said, wow, this is really going to be laborious and challenging. And then I started doing it. And I have to say it was the most amazing thing. And Angelo, I will get to your question, but I always heard and experienced, if you met one family office, you met one family office. And actually, after keeping this spreadsheet and reviewing it and every year looking back on it, I started to see patterns. I started to see things emerge that were very, very similar among families. And so with that lens, I will say that in all these meetings, which were fascinating, I also had an opportunity to do them as a partner to a financial advisor. I could sit there, I could really listen, I could really engage with the family, and I could apply all this knowledge that I had to hopefully make a contribution, a good one, to the conversation. So some of the things that I find were a little surprising to me was just how complicated it is to have a family office and how challenging. You need to be CEO, you need to have expert business management skills, you have to have risk management skills, investment management skills, people management skills, and an ability to lead. So when I think about these, they're truly complex family enterprises and not simple things to run. Second thing is, every single family cared about legacy. They cared about their kids. They cared about instilling that pride, that sense of family pride, stewardship, and also many, many, many families, again, logic, but worth mentioning, really worried about, how do I, in this enormous wealth, keep these kids grounded? Every single one. Third thing, really shocking to me, everyone assumes wealthy people know all the other wealthy people. They don't. Families, maybe you're a manufacturing family in the Midwest and you don't know other families. You want to be connected. So I never underestimate putting families together in a room and how important that is.
You said something.
I also didn't have an appreciation for how illiquid family offices actually are. If you have your entire life in an operating business and you're all in, and then you compound that, the illiquidity of multiple homes, and then you compound that with art and things that are not as liquid. I really had an eye-opening experience understanding the illiquidity of families and why borrowing and lending and establishing relationships with institutions like a JP Morgan, where you could have lines of credit, were so critically important. I would say the final 2 points, increasing complexity of the family office. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. But when you look at family offices now and you're running these organizations, you have to worry about cybersecurity. You have to worry about rising costs. You have to worry about securing talent. There's a war for talent out there. Now, I know a lot of families are migrating toward, a lot of very talented professionals are migrating toward family offices, but you don't only have to get the best person, you actually have to get someone that you trust. So that war for talent's important. And then I would also say costs. The rising costs of infrastructure and all of the extra things that you need to protect your family, not to mention taxes, which I know we've talked all about, are things that all are taken into consideration. And I would say the final thing that I would say on the positive side, and we're going to talk a lot about this today, I know, Angelo, is how families are professionalizing. I started working with family offices very closely back in 2010 when I ran my own firm, and I could not believe the level of sophistication, professionalization, and we're going to talk about two families who are really, really changing the face, not only of private equity, private credit, but the entire investment landscape. So on the positive side, they are a force, and it was an exciting opportunity to work with families who are at the forefront of driving that change.
Jolyne's a great storyteller. So very shortly, you're going to hear two stories of two amazing families that she's allowed in terms of to share information. And you don't often hear that. So stay tuned. That's upcoming. But she said some things, Jolyne, I think that were great, that I want to follow up on and I want to get your opinion on. You said that every family, and this confirms my experience over near 20 years and 2,000 plus single family offices as well, that legacy is always important. To me, I define that, which is one of my company names, SFO continuity, as continuity in the family. If it's always the most important, how come it may take a generation or two, but how come it tends to fall apart? Meaning they know it's a problem, you think they're addressing it, but over time, decades, likely it still is going to fail. Why?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about this and what makes a family office great and what makes them mediocre. And I think this is one of the key elements. And I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's really about leadership skills. It's really about getting the right people surrounding you, whether they're family members, whether there's outside talent. And I think it's also defining the mission statement for the family. You know, I used to hear this at UBS when I first went in, and I was thinking, like, mission, vision, values, those are the things that I did, like, think about when I started my hedge fund, co-founded it, when I started my own firm. These are things that are critically important to families too. And the ones that are great and the ones that get it so right are really focusing on that, not only at the outset, but annually, periodically, reinforcing. And this is why, Angelo, I think the statistic might change that only 10% of family wealth survives to the third generation. I actually think, given all the professionalization, all the attention on this, that statistic actually will improve.
And another thing you said that also outlines in my experiences, having relatively recently come back from a long stay in Europe and meeting with iconic dynastic families, is you're correct. A lot of them are more illiquid. And it's not just an LP interest. It usually is from the perspective of how great wealth, how empires are built, usually is a level of ownership and control of often private companies. So their opportunity to utilize banks, to utilize lending, the impact of the economy, inflation, interest rates, all interplay into the value that a family office provides. But would you broadly agree that to build wealth is usually in concentration, in ownership and control? But can I make the point, because I think we all know that already, that to continue great wealth, it's not as simple as I'm going to outsource and be incredibly liquid. I still may need to engage my generations in how the world works, getting their hands dirty, understanding how real businesses operate, and the value of investing and owning and often controlling private companies.
Yeah, I think that you look back at all the history of families, they all start with business and they all start with building business. And what I think is so interesting about how they continue to build wealth, it's not only in their core competencies, whether it's a mining company or a banking company, the great JP Morgan and others, then they start investing in and building other businesses. They bring the next generations who find interest in other sectors and industries. So yes, when you look at the breakdown of global family office wealth, the almost 30 to 40, actually it's a larger number, it's almost the majority, 70% are really from businesses, founding businesses, growing successful businesses, and diversifying away from those businesses. Because as you said, the concentration risk in one limits you, and it's good diversification. So when families can both through their investment portfolios and their operating businesses diversify, those make those great dynastic, long-standing, generational family offices.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit on something that you said, that you're seeing effectively an enhancement in family offices becoming more rigorous, becoming more institutional. And I agree, but not to be overly contrarian. And my audience has heard me say this comment many times, and I want you to disagree with me on it. I do have a saying that it's so easy to identify pretty early on when a family office is great. In my opinion, most, and I guess it's mathematically an accurate comment, but most family offices are effectively mediocre. Now, how do we define that? There's not a lot of quantifiable metrics outside of investing. A lot of it is qualitative in how the family feels. I get it. But from my experiences, I go in there and I'm sometimes a little disappointed. It's comfortable, it's safe. So I have a saying that average family offices want to be left alone, good family offices want to be mentored, but great, which to me is about 3%, great want to be told the truth. I'll give it to you.
Okay. Well, I've heard you talk about this a lot, so I have an unfair advantage on this question. I know where you come out on it, but I would say it really, really depends on how you measure it. And I know you said that. It's like any other business. There's going to be a small minority of the greats. There's going to be a lot of mediocre in the middle, and there'll be some not so good ones. But I would say don't underestimate, and this is where I think people look at wealthy people and say, well, it's easy. I mean, they have money. They could hire people to do things. I actually think every family strives to be great. I actually think every family wants to keep the family together. They want to create a legacy. The difference between the great ones is that they are constantly, every minute of every day, focused on it. And those are the ones that are thinking about the next 2 generations, thinking about the operating businesses, making sure that there is risk management in place, making sure that the communication and the lines of that the leadership is strong. So I actually don't think it comes down to who has the biggest AUM or who has made a giving pledge and who's the greatest philanthropic footprint. I actually think it just comes down at the end of the day to good leadership and good management. And those make the great ones.
Excellent. And that comes down to another one of my threes. People seem to like things in threes. It really comes down to people. In today's world, technology and systems. I could argue that people are really behind technology and systems, but if I had to rank them, not only is people number one, it's overwhelmingly, maybe by 80, 85% plus. If you don't have the right people in the right seat that are properly motivated, and I believe, given I'm a devotee of Peter Drucker and many others on practice management, people would benefit from a sense of more rigor, of being held to a higher standard. But broadly speaking, what you're saying is agreeing that it really comes down to the quality of your people.
Doesn't it always, Angelo?
Until one day AI is also powerful in singularity, yes, it still does.
I know we're going to talk about that. Yes.
You have the great insight of being in a senior position at UBS. And last year, some incredible research came out from UBS, Goldman, other institutions. And some of the results, which is intriguing, were relatively similar. So I'm going to ask you one of the questions. What does the research show, as well as maybe your anecdotal perspective, as the greatest concern for the super rich, for family offices, other than legacy? So really more the family office side, moving forward, and we're already into it, but in 2024.
Yeah, and I love this. So I actually have to say that UBS, their family office report, I've always found that to be one of the best. And I've spent a lot of time on that. They used to do it in conjunction with Camden. Now they do it alone because they're the largest wealth manager in the world. But I spent a lot of time looking back over the last 8 years, 9 years of that data. I actually did it for this call. And it's a very interesting one. Family offices, by and large, Angelo, the fears, the asset allocation, sort of, this is purely the investment side now, stayed fairly steady state for a long time. The pandemic, everyone had a wake-up call, and then 2022 when we had an S&P down 18 and we had NASDAQ down over 30, that was the first time we saw a shift in family office asset allocation. They really looked at, you know, it was the worst year since the global financial crisis in '08. And that's when families started really making subtle shifts in their asset allocation. But on the fears, we started in that year also with Fed rate cuts and worries about inflation. Inflation became paramount. I think now when I talk to families, when you look at all the data, it's geopolitics. And it's obvious that it's geopolitics because we're looking around the world today and we're seeing wars in two major or critically strategic regions for a lot of reasons. But also, I've discovered this other statistic. This year is the first time in the history of elections that we have more global elections for political offices than ever. There are half the world's population voting in 2024 for major elections like India, you know, we had Indonesia, we have the United States, which is going to be a very, very closely watched election, as we all know. So when you look at the undercurrents of geopolitics, I think that's would be the number one fear and driving a lot of families to think strategically about their portfolios and how to position for this.
100%. I was arguably too far ahead of the curve. 3 years ago, earlier during COVID, I started to talk about geopolitics. I educated myself. I formed an opinion, might have been wrong, and I interviewed a fair number of very prominent people from macro to economics to geopolitics. I was told, Angelo, you're pushing the boundaries. These are sensitive topics. And I knew the day would come, which it did technically last year, heading into the greatest fear of family offices being what's going on around the world. How could that not be a subject that they're going to have concerns about, as they should, which relates a little bit to one of my master classes, Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness for Families. Unfortunately, sadly, there's lots of things that could go wrong. We may circle back to that into family office operations a little bit later, but off the top of my head, and it varied depending on region, but I believe numbers 2 and 3 were still concerns over inflation and recession concerns as well.
Yes, absolutely. And again, in this shift in asset allocation, this is like where families now are thinking. I mean, we've always had this huge disproportionate overweighting in alternatives, as it should be. It's about 45% in alts, inclusive of hedge funds, directs, private equity, real estate. And that is something that is always increasing. Although I have some thoughts on that too, if we talk about private equity later in the industry and private.
We will.
But yes.
Yeah, I mean, for the audience, we really have a lot to cover today. We're actually going to get to Joelle's stories of the two families, which are going to be incredible right about now. And then we are going to talk about various things to the economy, to family offices, to operational issues. We're going to throw VC a little bit under the bus, at least I am. We're going to talk a little bit about private equity. And of course, we're going to dig a lot into the issues of women in wealth, women in family offices, and the dynamics of leadership. And that's going to be a interesting discussion. So that's going to weave its way in shortly. But you did hint at earlier a couple of families that you're allowed to share their story. And why don't I have you begin with one of them now? I'd love to listen.
Yeah, so I want to also put this in some real life context. I also do some teaching in our mutual friend Patricia Angus's class on family, enterprise, and wealth at Columbia Business School. And in preparation for that, I always like to weave in for the students actual case studies. So this isn't all theoretical, and they could really apply it to real life. So one of the theses that I've had for a really long time, and I talked about it earlier, was this rise of professionalism and the wave of direct investing that we saw back starting in 2010 when I started my own company, the Alberline Group, of families investing in direct deals. We are at a moment now where so many of these families who have put their own capital in, made successful investments, not so successful investments, are suddenly building platforms. They're actually taking in capital from other families, and they're actually building what I think will be the next Blackstones, the next Carlyles. And to me, this is fascinating. So I know I don't want to take too much time, but there's two families that I think are worth noting. I had the pleasure of meeting a wonderful Utah family, Jim Sorensen, who really is legendary in his work in the impact investing community. I met Jim back in probably 2015, and he has become a dear friend, and actually gave me permission to use his family journey to impact. Because again, where are we leaving legacies? Where are we leaving our lasting footprint as families? Jim has chosen to do it in impact. But I want to just say what he's done along the way. His father was a founder back in the 1950s. He actually died and left a lot of the family fortune, billions of dollars, to charity, to a foundation. But Jim was an entrepreneur. One of the sons started Sorensen Communications. Then he started a foundation. He started a venture fund that his son runs. But one of the things he did was get active in DC. He went to Washington back in 2017, and he was one of the people that was very critical in the legislation that led to opportunity zones. Then he started Catalyst, an opportunity zone fund. So here we are, venture capital, his own money, then outside. Opportunity zones, very hot in 2018, taking in capital. Then in 2022, one of the inventions along the way in his family was audio technology for the deaf. He started a fund called Enable Ventures, which basically was a seed fund with a mission to close the disability wealth gap by investing in scaling in early stage companies and leveraging disability as an asset. So we have that. After which he hired a CIO to actually build an RIA and advise other families and spread impact and show them how to do it. So for me, a man like Jim Sorensen, who could run his own family office, be philanthropic, do everything he had to do, is suddenly now building a platform and bringing other families alongside. So to me, that's a trend. We've seen this trend. Tony Pritzker did it in hiring Paul Carbone and building Pritzker. Michael Dell did it. So let's talk about Michael Dell.
Let's talk about Michael Dell.
I said to my class a month ago when I taught, I said, I actually think that the MSD BDT merger is one of the most transformative, interesting mergers that I have seen in my career.
Indeed. If you don't mind, Jolyne, for those that may not quite be as familiar, what is BDT and MSD?
Okay, so MSD is Michael Dell's family office. Michael Dell founded Dell in 1984. In 1998, he formed MSD Capital. John Phelan, Glenn Furman came in. This is a wonderful history. He established the Dell Foundation in 1999. 2013 takes Dell private. 2022 creates Dell Family Office. And in 2020, he hires Greg Lemkow, incredibly talented CEO. So he's building out MSD, starting to take other capital in. Byron Trott, 1994. Byron Trott, pre-IPO partner at Goldman Sachs. If you don't know him, he has built a very, very successful firm. In 2009, launched BDT. He advised families, business owners. That was his whole thing. Seeded by he was Warren Buffett's banker, so he was able to start this, and he establishes a merchant bank. And I remember watching him when I ran my own company. I had such BDT envy. In 2004, he raises Fund 1. 2014, raises Fund 2. 2023, he merges with MSD. And I'll talk about really quickly now why I think this is so transformative. MSD is a new investment advisory and merchant bank. 8 offices around the world, 4 core areas: private capital, credit, real estate, growth equity. What I think is so transformative about this is because this is all about an ecosystem of, I think they quote, 160 families. They source deals from the families. They co-invest alongside the families. They raise funds. They have patient, long duration capital. And when I think about the single biggest advantage that families have in terms of creating wealth, perpetuating wealth over the centuries, it's the patient capital and an ability to compound wealth. So when I see an MSD BDT, I say, whoa, families want to invest alongside families. Check. Families want to see alignment personally of the capital, that those families are actually putting in their own capital in the deal to a large extent. Check. Third, patient capital. Definitely. Check. And fourth, talent pool. I want to invest alongside the best and the brightest. This powerful firm can recruit them. So it's not a commercial for them. I actually didn't get their permission because I don't really know everyone there. But I think it's an exciting firm to watch, Byron, because it's all about families investing alongside families. And that's the next generation of private equity, private credit, big funds like the Carlyles and the Blackstones.
And we're going to talk a little bit, we'll weave in multiple parts of our discussion, going back to that a little bit later, about the impact and arguably the threat to private equity and the community and the advantages that family offices have. But following up a little bit on that, although I guess I'm giving it away, but what will be the impact, do you think, on family offices with the BDT MSD merger? I don't think this is actually being spoken about as much in the community as it probably deserves, but I'm not surprised. But we're talking about it here. That's what matters. So again, what will be the impact?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this. And I think that the Blackstones and the Apollos and the Carlyles are not going away. They're amazing, incredible firms, but they have institutionalized dramatically. Now, many of them have gone after more private wealth channels, and they're all actually thinking about that now. This great democratization of private wealth is definitely upon us. But what I actually really think is going to make those firms, they're going to be more the domain of packaged product to wealth management firms and institutions. And I think the firms like the MSDs, BDTs, the Pritzkers, the Declaration Partners, and even like the Solomers, people don't know them. This is the Romney family office. I mean, they're doing this. It's all about families investing in families. I think those are the firms that the family offices are going to gravitate toward for deal flow, for co-invests, for banking. When you want to sell your family office, you'll always use a Goldman, you'll always use a JP Morgan, but these firms are going to really come up, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to be in 10 years.
Absolutely. Back a little bit to the research at UBS, I believe, where was great wealth, billionaire wealth created, especially the last 10 years? I would look at finance, healthcare, certainly tech. Importantly, how is it going to look different, do you think? And I know we're projecting here in the future, the crystal ball, so we don't know. But over the next 10 years, is it going to be related to tech, AI? Is it going to be biotech? And the impact, which we're going to get into, of how women as entrepreneurs and are going to change some of the dynamic in multiple industries as well.
Yeah, I think when you look at where the majority of wealth, and I've also done a lot of work looking at the global ultra high net worth population, which is obviously rapidly growing and globally. But when you look at it, banking and finance is about 25% of where that global ultra population makes their money, followed by business and consumer services, which is 13%. Technology is actually only 7%, believe it or not. Real estate and healthcare, are following behind. When I think about that shift, I actually think banking and finance will stay, a very, very high percentage. But I do think as AI permeates not only just pure technology, but it crosses into real estate and healthcare and every other industry, that will be a source of tremendous wealth in the coming generations to come. Look at the rate of business startup in that area. It's all there. So as we see exits and as we see, businesses growing, I think a lot of the money will come from that sector.
and more related to your experiences with the 1,000 family offices over a relatively short number of years. And that's not even factoring in the other 1,000 plus you've known in your decades of being active in the community. But we've been hearing about the dynamic of wealth is changing, that there's 84 trillion. Each study is going to be different that talks about the transition of wealth over the next 20 years. It looks like finally, after a lot of talk, that change is upon us. Now, I could get a little deeper into people of great wealth, have greater access to healthcare, what's going to be the impact of AI, meeting with CRISPR, of gene editing, and who knows relative to longevity. So again, there's always going to be a Murphy's Law or something that we don't see, the bus that we don't see that gets us. It's always that way. But let's think linear for a second, which I hate to do, but we have to, and think about when you talk to the rising generations in the family that are now approaching decision-making authority within the family. Do you think there's real change coming that, again, perhaps a lot of people, our current advisors, current family offices, banks are going to be a little bit startled and surprised by?
Yes, there's a lot in that question. So I'm going to tackle it from the perspective of how the industry, I think this is a real challenge right now for the wealth management industry, who are really thinking about how to grow. But the single biggest event that is a catalyst for all of this change is the great generational wealth transfer. And when you look at that, Angelo, and you see $86 trillion, although a chunk of it, 12 million or so, will go towards foundations and charities, but the rest of it being passed down by baby boomers who now control half of the world's wealth. When you think about the power of that shift over the coming decades, and you think about who it's going to, and this gets to our whole other side, it's women and millennials. And when I teach this at Columbia and I talk about it, I get really fired up. And women right now control $10 trillion of wealth. They're going to control upwards of 30 over the next 10 years, $30 trillion. This is going to have profound changes, not only for the wealth management industry, but I think for the world. I don't want to overplay this, but I will. And just look back on 2023. I mean, they've dubbed 2023 the year of the woman. Why? I mean, Taylor Swift single-handedly added $6 billion to the economy. My fellow classmate at Barnard, Greta Gerwig, Barbie, $1.4 billion. Beyonce lit up every town she moved in, played in. It was the Beyonce bump. And we're going to get to Caitlin Clark, I hope. But anyway.
Oh, we are getting to that, trust me. And a little bit of Taylor Swift, too.
All of it. I love her. I think as we see this incredible shift, what is it going to mean? And this is where I want to get. What does it really mean about this next generation? Women control and start more businesses right now. Today, women control 39% of all the businesses in the United States. Believe it or not, 14 million. And they employ 12.2 million people, and they generate $2.7 trillion. But if women could get access to their own capital to start these businesses, or at least get funded at the same proportion as men, do you know that would add an incremental 7.9 trillion? So think about when this money starts flowing, Angelo, and women have it in power and they're not dependent on a male-dominated venture capital industry to secure funding for their own businesses. What does that mean? Philanthropy. We know women are highly, highly philanthropic, but I know as a board chair at Barnard trying to get money from women whose husbands went to Columbia too, the money went there. It didn't go to Barnard. So what happens when women are controlling philanthropy, women investing in women? I'm going to take it another step further. Women's health. There is a minimal proportion of spending on research dollars in women's health. It's like less than 10%, and a fraction of it is going towards issues, critical issues like menopause. What happens when women have money to go into research funding? How does that change the landscape? We're going to see women we know all the data. Women care about sustainable investments. They care about the planet. They care about social inequity. What's going to happen with the whole wave of sustainable investing that's really under fire right now when women have the money? Political office. Like, I can go on and on. The brands, like when I think about brands, my daughter's in brand management and strategy. These millennials, they vote with their feet. They'll boycott brands that are not aligned. They'll pour money into brands that are. I think the shift of all of this is going to be remarkable.
What does the research show, as well as simply your qualitative anecdotal experiences related to what you just said, on the differences between male and female within the rising generation? It could be on family legacy, it could be on philanthropy, which you touched on, and rather bluntly, it could also be on investing. Now, we're about to enter a part of our discussion for a while that is going to be a little interesting. I'm excited to learn so much from you. If I disagree on certain things, I'll push back and we'll have a conversation. These are not conversations, not to trump my own horn and my platform, that honestly you're hearing in other or most other family office settings, because they're deemed to be a little sensitive. Let's be very down the middle. But no, let's talk about it. So there is such a thing as evolutionary biology and psychology. There are quote unquote differences. And I'm assuming you have picked up in your research, as well as your own, again, anecdotal, of there are differences in the rising generation of wealth, male and female, and how they make decisions and what's important to them and move forward on. Or no, do you find it to be perfectly exactly down the middle for both?
Okay, so we talked about this before too, the nature versus nurture thing. I think that there's reams of reports written on how women lead differently, how women invest differently and the things they care about, how women just manage their own money differently. So I think that coupled with what the millennial generation, and even more importantly, the Gen Z generation, I think there are stark differences that you're going to see happen over the coming decades.
I agree.
When you look, Angelo, at this millennial generation, well, they're a little on the older end now. I'm sure you're all reading, and I'm watching with great sadness what's happening and unfolding on college campuses right now.
Sure.
This generation grew up on technology. They're media savvy. They can touch news in 1 second, get it anywhere, post anywhere, do anything. They're also the most socially active and politically engaged. And this generation is fearless. So when I see, the pushback, and again, I don't want to get this too much into anything political or around ESG or impact investing. And I look at this generation, and I look at the women of this generation in particular, watch out. I think this is something that we haven't seen in decades. And I think that the unfolding of this will have profound implications for not only our economy, but our society globally.
Okay, and we're going to stay in this topic for a while. So everyone my mom would say a cup of Ovaltine, but that's like 30 years ago. I get it. What we see the younger people now, and I don't have the research. I have a 20-year-old, and I'm just going by my interaction traveling the world. They don't seem to have as much interest, meaning the Generation Z, in the traditions of marriage, in the institutions of religion. And we could go in various different directions with that. But to some degree, all of those things concern me. And that leads to the issue of a declining population, of a little bit of a mutual sense of community and purpose, and certain standards that I believe are important that made both America and made generations going back really, again, 200,000 years of evolutionary biology. Now, yes, I know some of you are going to claim that marriage is an institution of the church and 700 years ago, and governments and institutions that people work and pay taxes. Not the time for necessarily that discussion, but more importantly, the rising generation. You mentioned good things about them. They're intelligent, they're tech savvy, but I see things where I'm not as impressed. and certain things I'm concerned about as a society moving forward. Am I that wrong? Give it to me if I am.
No, listen, I don't know that I want to say whether I'm impressed or not impressed, but what I really want to say is we need to understand better why this happened. And when you look at this generation, I look at my niece, Allegra, who's graduating in 3 weeks from Barnard. You know, when she joined Barnard in 2020, guess what? It was the pandemic. Her entire college experience has been marred by a lot of start and stop and turmoil. The generation a little older than her that lived through the global financial crisis, how is that any different for so many kids than living through the Great Depression in 1929? I mean, when I grew up, Angela, when you and I grew up, I mean, it was la la land. I mean, we were in peaceful times. You know, the 80s, when I started my career at Bear Stearns, I mean, it was the start of the bull market. It was a time of great prosperity for our country, a time of incredible globalization and global growth. So I think that everything happens depending on when you're born. And you have to look at all of this behavior in the context of when these kids were born and what colored and shadowed, you know, overshadowed their lives. So again, I'm not being overly sympathetic to them, because clearly I have some grave concerns too. I think my big concern is they really fear money. And if they fear money, justifiably so, given rents in this country and the cost of living in our world today, is that going to mean they're going to bunk up with friends? They're not going to get married. Many are not thinking about having kids at all. Yeah, this is pretty frightening stuff. But I have to say, and maybe because I'm an eternal optimist on mankind, that we'll get through this, and the human spirit is so resilient. We will have another generation of great growth again and great hope again. So I don't want to get too negative on this, but I have to say I do share your concerns a little bit.
It's yeah, I mean, those are, again, it's someone's own decision, what they want to do with their life. They should have the freedom to be able to do that. And whether marriage or kids, completely their choice. But if a large number of people are skewing away from marriage, away from having children, going back to what you said earlier, legacy, 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 there is no legacy if it follows that pattern generation after generation, decade after decade. To think that our bloodline goes back, what is Homo sapiens, 200,000 or so years. Again, we could argue some of that. And to think that, boom, it just stops like that for what our ancestors have went through. I don't know, just it's something. And again, these are, I know, topics that are a little sensitive for people. It absolutely relates back to demographics, geopolitics, economics, and family offices. Another question that will relate to that and keep our subject flowing is the demographics of college, of advanced education. The percentage of people graduating are notably, and how different this is from, I guess, 30 years ago, about 2/3. That's a massive standard deviation away from 50-50, which is about the population of females graduating college versus males. What's the good of that? And potentially, what's the bad? Should it be more balanced?
Yeah, this is something else that I think we have to spend a lot of time and pay attention to. You know, while I'm super excited about women and the rise of women and all the possibilities in the future as women amass greater wealth, I actually worry about the men. I think this is a really challenging time right now.
Yeah.
Especially for young white males, and because you're seeing a real decline in the numbers at both educational institutions, you know, and in a lot of other statistics, suicide rates among young white men,
Violent crime, suicide rates,
yeah,
the number of men that are under 30 that have never had a relationship, never engaged with, whether it's a same-sex partner, I don't care. Just the opportunity, men are struggling now. And I would say women in many ways are thriving. And I get it. There have been times when that has been suppressed and challenges, and we're going to weave that into advisory and family offices. But pardon, I get a little excited about the subject. Please continue.
No, not at all. I mean, I really agree with you. And when you look at the number, I mean, women are numbering men 1.4 to 1 in undergraduate programs, which is a lot.
That's a
And
lot.
1.6 to 1 in graduate programs. So I think the shift that I actually think is a silver lining, I always want to try to be as positive as I can, is that more women, and this goes to your original question about the change afoot and what the implications are actually entering STEM majors: science, technology, engineering, and math. I remember I was petrified of math. I was actually not a good math student. Truth be told, I failed geometry and had to go to summer school.
I mean, of course, we all did.
But I am
honest about it.
but I will say that women now, are really overcoming all of these traditional stereotypes against them and entering all these fields of science. And neuroscience is one of the most popular majors now on college campuses, and a lot of it will be women. So this is, one of, I think, again, the silver linings of women getting educated, the silver linings of how that education has led to shifts in careers that, for the future.
Yes, although impacting that future is going to be AI. We don't exactly know, of course, how that's going to play out. I hear statistics that it'll be 800x more powerful, but what does that mean in 2 years? It will never be weaker than it is this very second that we're talking. And I guess all that is true, but nonetheless, what is that? And these are some of the concerns. I know I have a son who's, again, young, that they have about their future. What major, what's the future going to look like? What's going to be a sustainable industry? These are all things that are of grave concern. And I believe to some degree, honestly, should be. And if more and more people start to take a given major, we don't know the impact that AI is going to have on it. And that's going to come down also to supply and demand. The less plumbers, the less this, the less that, then the more in demand that's going to go up. If everyone wanted to be an attorney, if everyone wants to be an accountant, that gets watered down. And by the way, no question, those two industries that I noted will absolutely be impacted by AI. So currently, I believe the numbers, I might be wrong, in the family office world are 73% of people in a family office are male. But the population is about 52% female, 48% male. Men don't live quite as long, enter more dangerous occupations where they could die, and are more active, unfortunately, in things going on in military and war. So that's why it's not closer to 50-50. Yet that is heavily skewed. I have to admit it. The family office world is massively skewed to males, and that's not even breaking down C-level positions, CIO. It's obvious that's changing. Is it happening quick enough? And what is going to be the impact?
Yeah, so I think we could talk about this shift from definitely the family office world, but I think we'll get to it on the wealth management advisor side, the advisors to wealthy families.
That's
but
my next question.
Okay. So specifically on the family office side, yes, we are largely people who are running family offices, whether they are family members themselves or outside family, recruited to work for the family office, are disproportionately male. I mean, Angela, I just say I have hope that that's changing. I actually anecdotally will say I know a lot of women now who have most recently gotten recruited to work as CEOs and CIOs in family offices. And again, as women get more confident with money, as women get educated, as women, take leadership roles in their families and digging deeper on the investment side, as women start more funds. I mean, look at the trend of women starting either venture capital funds or hedge funds or wealth management firms. I think that this will absolutely change. And the recruiters are gearing up for it, who recruit for the family office world, and they're trying to line up pipelines of talent because it's just going to have to happen.
Yes, for all the reasons that you noted, and some of the reasons that we noted earlier relative to differences in investing and decision making between male and female. And that relates a little bit to my next question, and a bit of a sensitive subject. And again, it goes back to biology and evolutionary psychology and biology. Men have 17 times the level of testosterone of an average female. That is a lot. does that drive men making certain bad decisions, being effectively letting ego get in the way? And when I think of women as generally, and I know we get in trouble when we do that, but being more balanced in their decision-making process, not letting ego get in the way. And again, is that societal? Perhaps a part of it. But when I'm talking about hormones in our body are that much skewed differently in the male, now in certain things in combat, that might be helpful. So again, it goes back to what made us thrive as Homo sapiens versus other forms, Neanderthals, etc. So there's a reason the way things are the way they are. But boy, I guess I'm really getting to, does male ego and sometimes rushing into decisions and bravado get in the way? And that's not going to be a good situation in a family of wealth.
Yeah, I mean, this is back to the nurture versus nature. I think women are born inherently, I mean, we are born to create and hold children in our bodies. So we are by, birth more nurturing. But I also think that there are significant inherent differences in women, how they lead. They're definitely more communal. They definitely want to sit. I know how I led differently. I have an ego. I mean, we all have an ego, so I don't want to bash men for having egos, but I do think that women can be more communal, more open. They want to hear every voice in the room. It's kind of like how I am as a mother. I mean, you want to actually hear everybody out, but then at the same time, you make the final decision. So I do think that that is a benefit to women. And whether it's because of testosterone, I don't know, but I do think it has to do a lot more with ego and an ability to let it down, to sort of admit mistakes more readily, and to really want to engage more fully with everyone so that every voice is heard in the room. I will say, as a woman who grew up on a trading desk, I'm not so sure that that is how, most of the world works, and especially finance and, powers of money. It's very, very hard to be a strong voice as a woman, although that's changing.
And related to what you said, I hear you. And I gave you that question, admitting there are, on average, certain advantages. You mentioned women being more active listeners, greater emotional intelligence, my word, but effectively kind of what you said, and more communal in terms of community, society, and listening. And broadly, I think that's good, but I can't make it that easy for you, Jolyne. Come on. What is the downside of that with you having been a female leader, and I'm assuming been around male and female leaders? When could that community, that communal aspect go too far, and you're better off having a little bit more balance on the other side as well?
Oh, don't take my or women's ability to hear multiple voices and want to as a sign of potential weakness. I actually don't think it can go too far. Listen, you at the end of the day, as every leader, have to make the final decision. And it's sometimes, and oftentimes these days, again, I keep looking sadly at what's going on college campuses right now. There are unpopular decisions. I don't think women are afraid to make unpopular decisions. I just think that they make more careful consideration of every viewpoint before making that final decision, no matter how tough and unpopular it could be. Whereas I think male counterparties, and again, my male friends don't shoot me. I think that, sometimes they may think, I don't need to hear every single voice in the room. I can hear a few, but at the end of the day, I know the right decision and I'm going to make it. And that's okay too. That's just a different style.
And we mentioned related, we would come back to this. So the advisory community,
yes,
I believe from the RIA financial advisor perspective, a lot of these are aging males. They're aging out. They're having liquidity events. And I think the numbers are, and you're going to know way better than me, but in the coming year or years, 200,000 advisors are going to exit the industry. They're going to be replaced. Obviously, younger people, more diverse, and female are going to come in. What impact will this have, and what opportunity does that create for them?
I think this, next to technology and AI, This is one of the single biggest challenges for the wealth management industry today. You look at the advisor base, there are actually 330,000 wealth advisors in the United States today. 72% of them are male, and the majority of them are white. 43% are over age 55. So
Wow.
when you think, yes, when you think about the aging out of the advisor cohort over the next 10 years, when those 55s or 65s and may want to retire, and then you couple that, Angela, with this great generational wealth transfer and all this money going to more diverse not only women and millennials and Gen Z, but a much, much more diverse population. Look at this country today. So when you think about that, I think the wealth management industry has a problem. And they can't recruit fast enough more diverse professionals who are, who can address a more diverse ultimate client base and more women.
Yes. And again, this goes back to what we've been building, a little bit of that narrative and how dynamics are changing. And by the way, for those of you that may have a completely opposite perspective, just because you feel that way and your anchoring and your confirmation bias is not going to stop reality from happening. Demographics, how things are changing. And this goes back a little bit to some of the things I said earlier. The most successful people that I know and the people that are incredible in poker, as new information comes in, they adapt. You might have a strong opinion, but as new information comes in, you adapt that. Don't get anchored and realize that reality is reality. That's what's real. Like, there really is, one of my sayings is there's no such thing as confidence to a degree because it can't be measured. It's competence, which could be measured. And that leads you, unless you're faking it, which some people do, that leads you to the opportunity of appearing confident to other people. But I get off on my Angeloisms and a little off track. And I promise the Caitlin Clark question is coming very shortly.
No. Angelo, I want to add one more thing that I didn't about the change in the wealth advisors. There's going to be a change in the role of the wealth advisor too. And I want to just spend 30 seconds on this. My father was a stockbroker. He worked back at Shearson, and then they became then they became financial advisors. Then they became wealth advisors. Well, when you look at what a wealth advisor today is going to have to look like 10 years from now, they're going to be like wealth advisor life coaches. I mean, so many of them.
How true.
So many of them are being called. I know I called my advisor with the strangest things. I mean, people want help figuring out Medicare. They want to need help about ageism aging population. How do I take care of my parents? How do I take care of my kids? How do I think about impact investing? How do I preserve my family wealth? So women are going to be very interesting in this role as the role of the financial advisor changes and becoming not only an investment advisor or a financial advisor or wealth advisor, but a life coach. So enough on that, but I think it's an interesting thing to ponder.
No, that's fantastic. And please have comments and questions. I believe a mutual acquaintance of ours, Jolyne, Steffi Bird-Baker. Hello, Steffi. It's been a while since I've seen you, by the way. Thank you for your comments. I'm glad you're enjoying the conversation. And please feel free to ingratiate yourself, ask a question. It's okay to rock the boat. You don't have to agree with either of us. You can have a different opinion. That's good. That's encouraged here. I don't want to be boring and vanilla. And again, this goes back again to your experiences at UBS, your research, as well as your anecdotal experience, the real story behind impact investing. And I know it sounds unrelated, but how the rising generation, I'll tie it in, how they feel about the value of their values in impact investing and effectively equality within the family and within the companies and people they're investing in, whether it's a public or private company. Are these issues important to them in your experience?
Yes, we could spend a lot of time on the evolution of impact investing and how it right now is really coming under a bit of fire. But I want to offer a different perspective that I think could be very refreshing and different, other than the statistics that everyone knows. I'm sorry, no matter the backlash, people still care about this. I talked about it all the time in the meetings, how to align my values as a family, how to align our mission as a family, how to think about our philanthropy and how to extend it over into our active investment portfolios. So I don't think impact investing is going away. I actually think, given, again, the generational wealth transfer and all this money going to women and millennials who we know because of the data are more interested in sustainable and impact investing, it's going to continue to grow. So I think that, you know, despite the politicization of the impact investing community and ESG, it's going to grow. But I want to offer one quick story that I think is going to happen more and more with families. So UBS wrote this groundbreaking report called The Continuum, and it's something that I think will give thought and pause to many, many families, including the next generation, and a way to include them. That report outlined how families are really thinking about aligning their philanthropy, the issue areas they care about in their philanthropy, to the corpus of the foundation in the way they, you know, do their MRIs and PRIs, all the way over to their active investment portfolios. The weaving of this, the continuum of this, I think is going to become an emerging theme. And to me, many people say, how do you engage the next generation? Well, you know, put them on the family's foundation board and get them involved that way. This is going to be an amazing way to do it, to really sit down in the family office meetings and think about how to create this continuum, how to create this alignment. And a lot of it is about impact investing. What I love about impact investing for families is impact investing gives you an ability to intentionally invest in a company, a fund, a public vehicle with a specific outcome. You can actually look at the 17 strategic development goals outlined by the UN. You could sit down with your kids, you could look at all of them, you could figure out the ones that are the most important to you, and then you can actually invest in an impact fund, better housing, or, you know, all the water, all the funds that are out there, the growing impact ETF market, and you could also do private direct deals. So to me, this industry is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to attract assets. And it is a wonderful way for families to create uniform engagement around the family office.
Excellent. And Steffi, I did prompt her. She did ask actually two excellent questions that we're going to get to in a second, because my question right before it's going to kind of make sense and lead into it. And it gets into what could be related a sensitive subject. Your opinion, I'll keep it very simple for now, your opinion of DEI.
Okay. I actually think DEI is critically important to address social and economic inequity, sort of full stop. I do think that the recent pushback was a very clear result of the 2023 Supreme Court decision removing affirmative action from college admissions. And I think that landmark case, which, by the way, we in the college community saw coming, and it doesn't matter whether we agree or disagree with it, but what it did was cause a lot of confusion in corporate America, who now there's rumblings that hiring practices will also be, you know, affirmative action, and the lack of will be extended to that. So corporations are understandably pulling back now. We're starting to see the annual reports come in for 2023. And there was a big article, I think, in the Journal the other day about Kohl's, and suddenly everybody's backpedaling on DE&I. I actually was so happy, and I applaud Jamie Dimon, who actually reiterated it in his letter, his year-end letter. I think it is critical, and I don't think it's going away. It may morph, but I think as legislative or, you know, legal ramifications are clearer, forget about the political backlash, that firms will return to it. We have to.
I'm listening to your perspective. I have a lot to learn and I want to be open-minded. I'm probably going to have a different perspective than you. And relating a little bit to one of Steffi's questions, a reminder, I am half Latino Puerto Rican. And yes, I've had things that have been held against me and things that I think have held me back. I have a saying, I'm going to have to clean it up for the audience here, but you could kind of read what I would normally say. Weak people think the world is against them. Strong people don't give a hoot. How about that word? If it is. Now, when you play the victim mentality, and again, I know I grew up broken home, welfare mother, very poor, half minority. And I could have taken the easy way out. People are against me. And some of them were. Like that is a reality. And we should change that as a society. That's not good. You should never judge someone by their ethnicity, their color, their sexual orientation. Judge them by the person that they are, their capability. But this gets to be complicated. I suppose if you're a big supporter, you're implying that certain groups have been held down a little bit. It might even come innately from their parents, from the educational system, although the educational system, I could argue, has went completely the other way in the last 10 or 20 years. And yes, I have to admit, there is truth to that. But like this goes to the old adage, if I'm having heart surgery, I don't care what their color is, male or female. I want the best heart surgeon I could find. I want the best airline pilot. Now, again, I know you're going to say others may not be given that same opportunity to become that. And this gets to be a complicated discussion. Why don't I get your feedback?
Yeah, I mean, these are deep-rooted, complex issues that not only are relevant in our country, but around the world. And I would say that I don't want to come off as saying, you know, everything has to be affirmative action and whatever. I'm not saying that at all. I think what I'm saying is it's all about opportunity and trying to give equal opportunity. We're not even at equal opportunity, although I will say that this country, I'm proud of the strides that this country has made that I think we don't fully get recognition for, but in increasing diversity in so many levels of our society. But I do think that we need to give greater opportunity, educational opportunity, basic housing, basic food opportunity to more people than we are giving today. Now, will D&I solve that? No, but I think D&I will go a long way towards supporting it and helping it.
In my travels around the world, I know a lot of us knock a lot of the problems that we have here in the US, and we got problems. There's no doubt about that. There's some aspects. I came back from traveling through Europe where there are the things that we complain about here are often worse in other countries. In Europe, it's a little nuanced depending on where you're going. I think they went overboard way the other way in challenges they're going through. But you go to other parts of the world, they are blatantly racist and all sorts of problems that I know we think of America as being, oh, it's so negative and this or that. I often, and I'm not going to name specific countries, sorry, everyone, but I find it worse elsewhere. But here's my question, Jolyne, how about, and we both know people that fit this profile, and they call me and they tell me, how about the 50-plus-year-old white male? This is a problem for them now in jobs. Now, if they're a rainmaker that produces money, that's the ultimate. I tell the young people, be really good in marketing and sales. If you drive revenue, no matter who you are, you're always going to have a job. But a lot of people in the white collar community in the world of finance, they're not necessarily a rainmaker. They're intellectual with experience. And now with AI, now with young people, now with issues on DEI, do you feel any empathy for the over 50-year-old white male in the world of finance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to look at the bookends here. I think we have to know what's happening with young men. And I also think we have to study what's happening with the over 50 male in the population, especially in light of what's to come with this generational wealth transfer. So I actually would agree with you on that. But I don't think we have enough data yet. But I do think that this will be something that will be very, very closely watched. But I also think AI will have ramifications not only for white males and white younger males either. I think it's going to be one that will hit all of us. But I do think there's more work to be done on that. It'll be interesting to see.
And I do also have Asian friends of mine that say it's horrifically unfair that they have incredible scores, incredible grades, they're wickedly qualified. But I guess the quota in many Ivy League schools is, we have enough people of Asian heritage. If you simply go by merit, then they absolutely have a point. But these are complicated issues. I am not saying that I have any answer. I have more questions than I have answers. And I think this needs to be discussed intellectually, as well as involve people where either side, the so-called extreme, because it's become overly political, the extreme right or the extreme left, they just don't listen. And that's a problem that I probably didn't see as short as even 10 or 15 years ago. Steffi did have some great questions. I'm going to look at the screen. I'm a little older, so I got to lean in close. How do we keep women on the rise while supporting men?
Yes, Steffi, that's a great question. And this is why we can't be too extreme here and say that the rise of the women means that it's the demise of the male. No way. I mean, when we really look at the facts, I'm very optimistic here and very enthusiastic, but look at the numbers where they are today. Men dominate almost every industry, especially ours in finance. So I think the sea change of this will be a sea change, and this will be an evolutionary change. This isn't going to be overnight. So I don't think that, we're going to get rid of all the men in all the leadership positions because suddenly I'm worth $50 million or $5 billion and I can do it. So we are going to this is going to be evolutionary. I'll leave it at that.
And Steffi also had an important part of that, which I could relate to. And again, I'm reading it now. I'd like to hear more talk about where minorities fit into the family office world. Her comments, it's rare to see minorities, either male or female, at even generically, a family office conference. So again, being half of Puerto Rican heritage and being involved in the community, having a liquidity event, being an investor, yes, I have to look at programs that I would host over the years. There was actually a pretty good balance of male and female. It could have been better, but I thought it was pretty good. But you're correct. I'm mentally going through my map in terms of people of Latino and of African-American heritage. They were underrepresented. Are there people that are successful in the community? Absolutely. Did organizations like mine and others do the best job of being more inclusive and reaching out to them? I think we could have done a better job. But I think her question is great. And there's no doubt in you knowing thousands of family offices, me knowing thousands of family offices, definitively Latinos and African Americans are well underrepresented. Let's try to put a little bit of a positive spin. Is that trend going to go up? Do you see positive improvements and enhancements in that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the data at hand on how many family offices, but I have the wealth data, and there's a lot of wealth data broken down by race and ethnicity, and there's just not a large enough population. So if you don't have the wealth in the hands of the minority population, they're not going to have family offices. But I do think that that's going to change. And as we look at, again, this generational wealth transfer and how the population in our global world, especially in the let's just focus on the United States, is becoming more and more highly diverse. And these young people go to college and have access to college more. This will change, Steffi, and I certainly hope and pray that it does.
Yes, and there are absolutely qualified African Americans and Latinos that are highly talented, very capable. And is there a level of some discrimination against them, being someone who could relate to some of the cultural heritage? Yes, I am not denying that. There absolutely is, and it's horrific. And we need to work on that better as a community. Okay, the question everyone wants, and it sounds a little tongue-in-cheek, but it actually is kind of serious. We're going to talk a little bit about it. What will be the impact? Note how I'm asking that question. what will be the impact of Caitlin Clark? If you want to talk about the WNBA, I'm good. But if you want to talk more broadly, I think that's where it gets really interesting. And I'm assuming, by the way, everyone in this audience, sports fan or not, should absolutely know. I mean, unless you're living in a cave, I'm assuming you know who Caitlin Clark is.
So I am not a huge sports fan. I don't watch a lot of sports activity, even though my husband was a double athlete in college. I go to a lot of
nice
football games. But I started watching women's basketball 3 years ago. There was a player named Abby Shue who was at Columbia, and my husband said, come to a game. And this is just my personal story, and I think it's relevant here. A girl who never went to games started going to all the all the Columbia women's basketball games. And they actually made it to the NCAA this year, which was so excited. It's so exciting. But when I think about Caitlin Clark and I think about the impact, she's kind of up there with what Greta Gerwig did with Barbie and Taylor Swift and the rest in her own way. And I think she raised the level of awareness, raised the excitement, brought joy and goodness to our world by her sheer incredible talent. So what I think will happen to sports, what do I know, but intuitively in reading, when 4 million more people show up for the NCAA final, the women's versus the men's, you gotta believe that media attention is going to start to go to the women's NBA, that Caitlin's salary now, which is, I think, $75,000 starting salary, is going versus 12 million for the, men's NBA. There's going to be huge improvements there as the media eyeballs, TV contracts, everything else kicks in. The women's NBA, I think, will dramatically change. That's one data point. I think the second data point is sports are hot right now. I mean, our own family just invested in an Arctos fund. It was the most fun thing to do. We engaged the entire family in the due dilicence. My son's boyfriend works for the Yankees, and we were
talking about the right team in New York. If it was the Mets, our discussion's over.
It was like a communal family investment. But I think when you look at the impact of her, when you look at Mark Lazary talking visibly, vocally about how much money is going to go into women's sports, how he's excited, he's putting his own money in. I think this is going to be a moment for women's sports. I think it'll lead importantly to narrowing pay disparity, to getting more visibility and eyeballs watched. And I think it's going to be really good for our country and really fun.
That's
a high note that we can end on.
No, that was great. Because I'm a huge sports fan and I think I have some context, I should probably keep my mouth shut. But of course, hopefully that's what makes me lovable to some and maybe hated by others. I'm very familiar with sports. I'm very familiar. The WNBA started in 1997, and there was some incredibly talented athletes that were a part of it then, and it's grown. Have I been someone who sits down and watches games and followed it even moderately closely? No. Did I follow women's college basketball really much over the last 30, 40 years as I've been watching sports? No. But here's the phenomenon that changed about 2 or 3 months ago. I don't know what it is. There's something about Caitlin Clark and her version of how she plays, loyalty to her team, her teammates, her state where I believe she's from. There was just something. If you say it's part media creation, you might be right, but it got my attention. And I know I can name more female college basketball players now than I could name male. And if you would have asked me that even the beginning of this year, I would have laughed at you. I think we're at the turning point. I think this is an incredible opportunity. I don't like some of the hate she's getting from women who are in the WNBA. We could talk a little bit about some of those issues, but not today. We'll save the women on women issues for perhaps a little bit of a different time. But I'm really enthused, and it's not just Caitlin Clark. It's others that were drafted that I watched during the tournament. The league is kicking off, May 14th. Her first game is going to be in Connecticut, which is my backyard of one of my co-homes in Greater Greenwich, Connecticut. So I'm really excited. I hope she's a star, and I hope this catapults the WNBA to finally, after near 30 years. Now, I will make a little bit of comment on what you said on pay disparity. It's just the math.
Oh, no,
You
I
understand?
don't agree with you. I mean, it's the media dollars. But I would say that she has the potential to do for the NBA what, the Williams sisters did for tennis. I hope
Absolutely.
for that. I hope for that.
I and so do I. But to give people a little bit of context, understand the WNBA for what, 27 years. I could be wrong. I don't think they've ever been profitable. And the NBA supports it or subsidizes it with $15 million plus a year. And I think that's going to change by the end of the season. The contract, I believe, is coming up. They should absolutely get paid relative to the eyeballs of people in the stands and mainly the TV contracts. And as the money comes in, make all the money in the world. It's all good. It's just driven by math. And I think that dynamic after 27 years is finally changing, and it'll be cool. I look forward to it. Okay, we're going to move off and go into a couple of other subjects. I do want to be respectful of your time. My audience knows I really do enjoy longer form interviews. So I know, Jolyne, it's been a little bit, my God, Angelo, it's already an hour and a half in. You probably got 10 more questions. Yes, left, of course. So why don't we go maybe a little more round robin on these? We hinted at it. What do you think will be the impact of AI on the industry?
Profound.
Wow.
I think it will actually change the entire wealth management industry. I actually think it will be for the better. They'll be able to tailor products to a more increasingly complex client base and really make things very personalized and, again, customized for that client. It'll be easier to do. I think in the impact investing world, it will have profoundly positive impacts because we can actually measure some of these outcomes and outputs and outcomes more effectively, which has been a big negative rap, a negative rap on the whole ESG impact investing community. I think it will change our entire socioeconomic, picture in our world. I also think that it will need guardrails, and I think everyone's watching, and we're trying to feel our way in a relatively new space and figure out how to mitigate any of the downside associated with it, which there's a lot.
Yes, and related to both women in wealth, to AI, to other things we've spoken about, my next question, what does the future of the family office look like to you?
We talked about this a little. I actually don't think the future of the family office in terms of their mission and what family offices are here for and what they're established for changes much at all. It's basically, a structure where family wealth and family members can come together to build legacy and to create and perpetuate and, preserve wealth. I think the complexion of the family office of the future is going to look a lot different. I think who's running it will look different. I think who owns family offices will look different as, again, the generational wealth transfer is underway. So I think there'll still be vibrant vehicles, structures, enterprises, but who's running them and how the money is managed and how it's managed will be different.
100%. And I tell executives that may be a little bit more older and stodgy this all the time. What do you think is going to happen when the principal or principals kind of move on, either they age, disability, or inevitably death, and the rising generation? What has been your communication with them? Oh, well, that's not my job. Well, you make it your job with the family principals, because if nothing else, it's job security for you, that to serve the family, you do need to engage more with the rising generations. How actively do you listen to them? And when they talk about things, whether you personally agree with it or not, on impact investing, on diversity, on this or that, are you looking at it like, oh, I can't wait for this conversation to be over? Or are you actively listening and learning? And unfortunately, this goes back to where we had a little bit of a disagreement. I think most family offices, I'm being nice, like me and Ron Diamond spoke about this a couple of weeks ago in an interview. When I say most are average, they could be so much better with the current people that they have. And there's practice management and strategies to make that happen, but that'll be the subject of other interviews, masterclasses, and work that I do. Jolyne, given your background deeply in investing, and given that one of my bases is Greenwich, Connecticut, I can't let a conversation go without talking about, and I interviewed Leon Cooperman earlier this week, the hedge fund legend that converted to his own family office. Hedge funds used to be 10% of allocations for many family offices. I believe per current research, including by UBS, but maybe it's others, it's way down to 4%. I did mention that to Leon, and he said artificially suppressed interest rates made shorting and more tactical strategies harder for hedge fund managers. But now we appear to be entering a world where there could be more potential for alpha. And again, he gave his reasons as to why that could go up. I'm not so sure.
Well, I cannot wait, by the way, to watch your interview with Leon, because he always has such pearls of wisdom, and I'm looking forward to watching that. But I looked at the stats again. I went back to the UBS report. It actually hit a low, the hedge fund asset allocation the family office asset allocation to hedge funds. It hit a low of 3% in 2019. It actually is slowly creeping up. It's actually 7 right now. 7.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's making
why? Well,
Greenwich is coming back.
No, because over the last 2 years, we started seeing an increasing use of hedge funds as diversifiers. And people started going into multi-strats, global macro, and real alpha generating equity long short managers. But to your original question of why the decline, I think we just saw over the previous decade, when you're paying 2 and 20, these are largely tax inefficient vehicles. And when you look at the alternatives out there, people weren't getting value for their money versus the fees that they were paying and the tax inefficiency inherent in many, many hedge fund strategies. So that was the reason for the decline. But we are seeing an uptick in hedge funds right now. And again, the money is going to the true, either hedge funds who can actually achieve diversification in a portfolio, and those who can actually generate alpha.
Of course. IPOs have also dwindled, probably not coming back in full force anytime soon, AKA less new public companies, at least in the US, coming on the market. What impact will this have on effectively the private equity industry and maybe family offices in general?
I'm actually going to give you a different twist on this, because there's a lot of data about the private equity industry right now, the challenges in a rising rate environment, the challenges to fundraising last year, acquisition costs being higher, and all the things we all know. Let me talk about something we don't know that I think will have profound implications, or that we're starting to really see. And that is the role of family offices in private equity secondaries. This, to me, Angelo, is something that we really want to watch. One of the last meetings I attended at UBS was with a sovereign wealth fund who asked to meet with a number of the top advisors, the family office consultants that I oversaw. And the meeting was centered around what happens at the end of life of private equity funds when these last assets are remaining. Well, the private equity industry are brilliant, and they've launched these continuation funds. I don't want to get into all the nuances of that. But is there a role for families to partner with either sovereigns or large institutions or not, or the MSDs, BDTs, and take these end-of-life assets for the fund and actually take them over? What will this growing secondaries, both in PE funds as LP stakes, but also direct investments? I think this is going to be another evolution in the private equity industry where families are going to play a really important role. And another reason why MSD and BDT could be so interesting to watch.
VC, I mentioned it earlier, especially what I would call Silicon Valley, the early tech game, and I've been there a million times. I've interviewed Peter Thiel, Naval Ravikant, Michael Moritz, so many others at events after events after events that I've hosted. It's an insider's game. Yeah, Peter Thiel, Ron Conway, their connections with Y Combinator, where a lot of the entrepreneurs are coming up, they kind of know who the winners are a little bit more likely to be. You don't have a chance to compete with them early stage. You may get lucky 1 in 1,000 times. You may get an opportunity to invest once they're past the earlier stage, and now some of the funds are getting involved. But I find early stage angel and venture, it's cool, it's sexy, looks what's going on. 3 years ago, Web3, now AI, and it's great. But if you're not boots on the ground, if you're not part of the insiders crowd, less to do with how much money you have. That actually less to do with it. It really is more, are you part of the insiders? To think that you're going to compete directly with people like that at earlier stage investing, you don't have a chance.
I actually disagree with you there.
Bring it on.
I would have said that if we had this discussion back in 2010 or even maybe 2014, 10 years ago. I don't think so now. More and more families, as they become increasingly networked, as they become increasingly larger and larger players in private direct deals, as they increasingly build these platforms that are launching funds to attract other families, I think they're very, very much more in the flow of the deals. And every early stage VC, and again, early stage VCs are numerous and they've been very challenged, but they're all trying to get to family office capital. So I would say that that dynamic that you talked about was very relevant, is less relevant, and will become less relevant in the future. Families will be on the inside track. They're more networked. They're more sought after. They're creating more of these organized groups to share deal flow and have access to deal flow. And by the way, every fund I know is trying to figure out how to get access to the wealth channels. So this is not only for billionaires, but I think all of this will trickle down into more ultra high net worth populations.
That's an interesting perspective. I think there's elements of it I would actually agree with. Having been there and having seen demo day at Y Combinator and all that, I just feel everything about the vibe of. Now, Chamath Palihapitiya has basically mentioned that early stage VC is kind of what he called, his words, kind of an embedded Ponzi scheme, that you drive money in, get eyeballs, try to get revenue, and just keep then more money coming in, then more money coming in. They almost, I would say, at the earliest stages are almost creating the winners, a little bit like, I won't get into how the art market for certain young artists, potentially what makes them take off, how it really works in the real world. But we could agree to partially disagree. Given the essence of time, I'll move on. What is your take? It's generally been a successful asset class and one of interest to families, effectively a private credit.
I like the private credit industry, and I know there's a lot of talk about, the dangers of it, especially since most of private credit is lending money to companies that are not getting funding from the banks, middle market companies,
yes,
lower middle market companies, more risky credits. But when I look at the PE industry at, over 4 trillion, and I look at the private credit industry, less than half of that, I think it's 1.7 trillion. When I look at asset allocation levels, Angelo, when you look at a family office's asset allocation and you look at the amount of money they have in private equity and private equity direct deals and what they have in credit, it's lower. And when you look at pensions, they have very, very low exposure. So I think there's still I think we're at peak asset allocation for families in a lot of private equity. Sorry to say that, but not in the private credit space. So I think it's actually a very interesting asset class. I also think it's one uniquely suited to families if they're large enough and experienced enough and have, strong investment professionals to be leaders and actually lead rounds and lend themselves to a lot of these middle market companies. But this is a gap in the market. It will continue to grow as banks continue to shrink, burdened by regulatory hurdles, that are required.
And an asset class that's gotten hit really hard since COVID, more so office space, but also tends to be very geographically driven, and that would be CRE, commercial real estate. If it's down because people were over levered, interest rates are higher, that creates for cash on the sidelines to buy distressed. But do you look at it as a long-term play? Is it very geographic, like office space in New York versus storage facilities in the Southwest? What's your opinion about opportunities for families in commercial real estate?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not an area that I'm an expert in particularly, and there's so much written about it, but I will offer again an alternative view on it that you may or may not agree with, Angelo. There will be opportunities, especially now with cap rates where they are in real estate. People will make money. The cycle will begin again. It's one of the most cyclical, it's one of the most cyclical industries, boom and bust. But I wish, and my hope is that we could look at all of these vacant commercial properties and we could really try to think about how to address housing and housing equity and the cost of housing for our young people today, and think about how to deploy some of that empty capacity to good. I'll leave it at that.
I think that's an interesting perspective. And we've hinted at this, we'll dive a little deeper in now. Will private equity firms be threatened by family offices? So we have banks that aren't really lending. We have private equity funds that are raising money, arguably overpaying in a multiple. And here's the big one. Family offices could, in theory, be patient capital, and they often have less regulatory challenges too. Now, I could get into a commercial enterprise, GP, LP. It's like you're having a restaurant versus a family office. It's your own kitchen. You don't have to open it up to outsiders. You don't got to answer to LPs. You could really be dynastic in what I said earlier about empire building. I absolutely, and I know me and Diamond spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, I absolutely feel that family offices will make a significant impact in the world of private equity, potentially venture capital and other industries, merchant banking, and change the dynamic of the industry over a decade.
I agree with you 100%.
That gets right to it.
I don't want to add any more. You elaborated. I mean, and this is where I think these powerful, large billionaire families today, like the Sorensens and, like Tony Pritzker before that, have really changed and will continue to change the landscape for many alternative asset classes.
I believe I'm heading to my last question. If the audience has anything they want to put into the chat feature, now would be a good time to do it. So, and maybe one comment on that before the final question. Now, this interesting, I think it passed late last year, this Corporate Transparency Act. And I did an interview with Tom Handler. It's on my platform in early December, where now it's about, you do have to reveal the beneficial owner, which is, it's okay. It's a little more work for quote unquote family offices, but where people like him and family offices are concerned about, and they had to address this way back in Dodd-Frank and other challenges, like, okay, you're shoving this in now, what's next? Now you're going to want to treat it like, well, what exactly do you own? What's the percentage of you own? And it's going to start to make more burdensome, more compliance and challenges for family offices to be the nimble, admittingly less regulated, admittingly, than quote unquote private equity. But in theory, they're not also taking in other people's money and capital. Do you have any opinion about that and how that could impact our idea about family offices really taking off? Is that going to hinder them?
I don't know that it will hinder them, but I also think we would be very naive to not expect regulation as families institutionalize, professionalize, amass greater and greater assets, and also start taking in outside capital from other families. This is inevitable. They are going to get regulated over time, or increasingly regulated as other investment entities are that access capital from others. So I don't think this is unexpected. I don't know that it will hinder the ability for families to be more flexible. It will take decades before they have to comply with Dodd-Frank.
Before I get to, I think, my final question, something came in on my text from one of my relationships. It goes a little bit back to the subject we were focused a lot on before. as a successful woman in finance, you have both been in leadership positions where you had men and women reporting to you, and the other way around, where I'm assuming you also reported in the past to men and women. Did you notice effectively a different dynamic in either role? And I think what he's mainly hinting at, did you find in a senior position, were men a little bit more difficult when they were reporting to you? It was something they were not as used to or comfortable with. And did you have to adapt in your communication to their sensitive egos?
Well, this is interesting. On the boss side, I have to say it is remarkable, but I have never reported to a woman in all my decades on Wall Street. So I cannot firsthand say what it would be like. I've reported to the most incredible, by and large, I wouldn't say 100%, but I was fortunate to have really incredible bosses who were mentors. So men and male bosses had a lot to do with my successful career. I witnessed, however, some differences, not a lot. And again, it's because the way I choose to lead. When I went to JP Morgan, I was in my early 30s. I was running the equities business, sales, trading, and research for the Americas at the age of 35. I had a lot of men, managing director men reporting to me. And yes, you have to tread a little bit differently because you don't want to ever feel that you're emasculating anyone or, treating men differently or women differently or being tougher on them. And I think that my leadership style and my management style has always been highly collaborative and very creating a meritocracy. So for me, I didn't really have any issue with it at all. And I think successful women shouldn't.
Will single family offices, and this is maybe counterintuitive to how they're gaining in popularity around the world, but will single family offices in time, reasonable time, the coming years, actually start to dwindle in number? At minimum, not go up so much as they have in the last 5 years.
I don't think they will. However, I think they will morph. And you also talked, I think, a little bit, I want to talk about MFOs. It doesn't always make sense. You and Ron Diamond talked about this at certain levels of assets for a family to really start a family office. It's really, really expensive. It could be up to 60 basis points of your total AUM a year just to run that family office. So do I think they'll dwindle in number? No, because that's saying that wealth generation and exits and wealth creation will decline. But will there be the number of single family offices? I actually think that one might be worth watching because families may find it more economic, more collaborative, more access to deal flow if they are more in an MFO structure.
Excellent. And I will have a parting comment that will talk about some initiatives and things that I'm doing, but being such an incredible guest and so gracious, and I've learned so much from having Jolyne Caruso on. And this was a really timely and very interesting discussion. It was probably one of our longer interviews from a digital perspective, but I usually have that effect with my 2-hour interviews. And again, I hope many of you found it dynamic, insightful, a little different than some of the things that you may be hearing in the community. And Jolyne was such an incredible guest. I learned so much. I have a lot of notes. I'm going to go back and watch it and learn from it so much myself. But Jolyne, before I segue to my close, other than that, I'd love to give the floor to you to talk about any or all of the topics we discussed today without interruption from Angelo, and have you have an opportunity to have your last word.
Thank you, Angelo. I want to thank you so much for inviting me today. It was a little intimidating to do this live, but it's been such a pleasure. And even though I think it's almost 2 hours now, good Lord, it was just an absolute pleasure. So thank you again. I just want to say that we live right now in extraordinary times. It is a time of incredible uncertainty, global turmoil, college campuses. I'll keep talking about that because honestly, it's haunting me every day and heartbreaking to me as I watch this all unfold. But I want to also say that this, I think, is one of the most exciting times. And again, it's the human spirit is resilient. It's exciting times for our industry, this generational wealth transfer, what the future of wealth will look like. Will the tide turn for women finally? And we'll see women and all the things that women will do. So despite all the gloom and doom out there, I'm actually really, really confident for our future and for our ability to get through this incredible time. So thanks for allowing me to share all of my knowledge and data on this and to contribute to a very thoughtful conversation.
And someone did mention, they did remind me, and they're up now on I got to make them more visible on my YouTubes, and I do have 2 platforms, but I have interviewed some amazing people, and some of them, of course, are women in the last couple of months. Please go back. You may have to go to my live section in YouTube. Obviously, Jolyne today, and I think you all would benefit from listening to it again. Forget me, her. Also watch and listen to, I think Jolyne might have saw it, my interview with Donatella Ciccarelli. Donatella is Italian, of course, half of my heritage, so I like that. Led a $10 billion plus single family office. And when I think of CIOs who I've met, and I have met her when I was in Austria, and that I've also interviewed, I don't know if I could really think of one that is better than her. She's really good. And this is someone who understands the economy, macro, the global picture, the US, the dollar, has invested in over 100 different LP interests at one time and managed that like that. It was not even an issue. She said she could have done, I think, 200 of them. Also, Rebecca Patterson, who also Jolyne knows. I did that one back in October. She's fantastic. There are incredible people, both men and women, that are out there. And I have been so fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from them and ask some of my quirky questions and a little bit of my informal, a little rough around the edges style. But I guess at this stage, I'm not going to change. Jolyne, for those that have an interest in either following you or wanting to know what you're up to, is there ways, either social media, email, or website, that they can learn more and follow and interact with you?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process. I'm working with some amazing emerging managers right now, and I'm in the process of setting up a website, but I think the best place for people to reach me would be on LinkedIn. You can just direct message me on LinkedIn. I really am very, very responsive and answer. So I look forward to it.
Great. And for those of you that may not be familiar, Jolyne spells her name Jolyne, Caruso, Caruso. So just a heads up on that. I guess my comments, and I kind of gave indirect closes in the last couple of minutes. One, it's been an extreme honor to have Jolyne on. So much that I learned. I hope all of you enjoyed it. I know my interviews tend to be longer form, and I know they're probably a little different than certain interviews that you're used to. I enjoy topics that are somewhat, let's go with the word sensitive, because I think that's a problem that we're having now on both aisles, if I can make it political. They're both idiots. So how we could have, like we used to, open and honest discussions where I could learn and change my opinion. When I meet billionaires and I learn from them and I travel the world and I do my research projects and that, you would think that they're all full of ego and they never change their mind. Completely the opposite. You do a mastermind or a peer group with them, and these are people making crazy money. I have some that make over $100 million a year. They are at the edge of their seats listening to a peer who may not be quite as accomplished as them, but learning. They're learning new things. They're debating ideas. They're talking about it. And I think this is a big mistake that a lot of us go through now. We get too anchored, too confirmation biased, all things that I said earlier. If you don't follow me at what I call Family Office TV, I have 2 YouTube platforms. One is Family Office TV. One, my old one, which is much bigger, is at Family Office. Why I have 2, I don't know. I sometimes make unusual decisions, but it is what it is. They're free. Follow them. We're going to be more active adapting our homepage on both of them, so you don't have to go into the live button and see what I did whatever weeks or years before. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You could follow me there. And I wanted to just give about a minute because a lot of you still don't know. Like Angela, we know you left or sold Family Office Association. Besides your wonderful interviews, thanks to my guests, what am I up to now? I love to teach. So for me, there's a dearth of information on single family offices, how to create them, how to run them, practice management, Peter Drucker, Jim Collins-like principles, which are not being done. I hinted at all of that earlier. There's so much work to do to make family offices go from, and again, stealing from Collins, from mediocrity to good and from good to great. That chasm, that difference between good to great may only be about 10%, but it is tough. I actually don't think it's that hard to go from mediocrity to good. I have a saying in the consulting projects that I do, hopefully I live up to it, that probably within 30 days, there's certain principles in practice management and understanding what the goals are, tracking those goals, and implementing strategies for you to be successful at them that I really think are pretty straightforward. Yet many family offices just still, even MFOs, they just don't do them. So I do love to teach through my consulting practice and family office masterclass. And I did miss getting together in person. Although sometimes I'm a little bit more of a nerd who wants to be left alone in Wyoming, Connecticut, or Vienna, wherever else I am. I do miss the social aspect, and having ran an organization, having hosted 400 events, having met thousands of people. I've been so lucky and fortunate. I do miss that. So I softly created SFO Continuity as a private membership club, but really only in the last month if I quote unquote ramped it up. I'm looking for 30 founding members as a principal, rising generation, or family office executive. I'm just kind of going out a little bit in the market with it. I already have, 12 or 13 in the last month or so that came on board. Founding members get special access, get early opportunity, get more direct communication with me, get better pricing, and we'll have a say in how we move forward. After 30, I'm going to do a pause, what appears to be 6 months, and then together as a group, we'll slowly begin to grow and add. My 2 hubs and in-person events are absolutely a part of it. More intimate soirees, roundtables, and private dinners around investing and best practices. I just got back from a week in Palm Beach for over 3.5 days, multiple little programs at the Breakers, at the Brazilian Court, at the Colony. It was incredible. I love Palm Beach. That is going to be our home from November through April. But now we're heading into May. I'm in the greater New York area, so New York will become our hub. Maybe we'll do a Hamptons event this summer. I hope to do something in my beloved Jackson Hole and maybe LA and other locations. But the intimacy, no more big events, no more sponsors here and there, really intimate, very private, and really going deep. We went into things on family dynamics, on structuring, on family office issues, and mainly because everyone wants to hear about investing. What are you investing in? What's working? What's not working? How do I get access? What I learned on certain real estate deals from an amazing gentleman in Texas that's now a part of what we're doing. Wow. Like the lessons you're going to walk away and the opportunities you're going to have are worth, honestly, 100x whatever I'm charging to be a founding or a charter member. But if you're interested, simply go to angelorobles.com. Again, that's my website, and probably the best way to reach me. Email is angelo@angelorobles.com. But on angelorobles.com, I'll have a membership tab. It'll give a brief 3 or 4 paragraphs. Kind of here's what you get. I like to keep that part simple, actually. And it's an opportunity to potentially move forward and be one of the 30 founders in terms of what I'm doing. So pardon a little bit of the extra pitch here at the end, but I really haven't spoken about that in any of the interviews I've done. I might have hinted at it once or twice, but never really went a little deeper into it as we're doing this interview towards late April of 2024. So you have some context. So thank you all. I appreciate the live participants. Keep on coming back for more of what we do. I love to give back to the community and give back for things that hopefully provide value. And I believe you got great value from Jolyne today. So have an opportunity to follow her and reach out. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Have a great week, a great time. And I look forward to interacting with all of you. And again, Jolyne, thanks for being a guest today. I appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.